What's the most inappropriate time you laughed? At my grandaunt's funeral, she was a big, jolly food lover while alive, and is sorely missed. Everything was going along. Lots of tears, while the vicar was giving the eulogy, until he shared her last words. Kuomon. A little whipped cream isn't going to kill me. I lost my crap. This was 10 years ago, and I still feel terrible for laughing. I always had a problem laughing when I was being scolded in my childhood. Then I would be scolded further for laughing. Then I would laugh more. It was a vicious cycle. Cadaver room. One of my classmates accidentally stuck his finger in a kidney because he thought it was behind glass and tried to poke the glass. He was like, squish off Rick. Me and a friend were altar boys. An older woman took to the podium to read a Bible passage. The passage described how Jesus loves everyone, the sick and the healthy, the rich and the poor, the circumcised and the uncircumcised. That's all it took for a pair of 10-year-old boys to start laughing hysterically in front of a packed church. My computers teacher in middle school told me he was run over by a car when he was a child. I laughed because I thought he was joking. He was not joking. A buddy of mine tried to fart on the pew in church and fricking unloaded a dump truck load of crap into his pants on accident. This was during a quiet moment, and I was absolutely howling with laughter. A young teenager was leaning forward in a chair at a restaurant, lost traction, and slammed their face into the table. Absolute hysterical sobbing ensued. Their parents stopped eating their salads to make sure they were okay. They were, aside from a nosebleed. I was sitting at the table next to them and cracked the frick up at the sound of them hitting the table. And even more when they started crying. I was a horrible human being in that moment. Feel bad after the fact. But in the moment it tickled me to my core. Group therapy. A kid, 22 or so, but you get the idea, was talking passionately about his struggles with Asperger's and OCD. He had a squeaky voice. He started talking about his OCD categories. Things that belonged under the earth. Things that belonged on the earth. Things that belonged in the water. And things that belonged in space. He named specific objects. Rocks, bugs, etc. He said there were some things he could not fit neatly into his categories, even if they seemed like they were supposed to be in one. This distressed him. He bemoaned cars. He bemoaned women, and pointed at one. Then with no seg, announced that the reason he was there was because he snuck into the zoo at night and leapt into the lion enclosure. I had to bury my face in my elbow and turn away. Of course his problems were real, but it just seemed so out of place on a day when people were talking about who diddled them when. My daughter was in probably 1st or 2nd grade, and she was doing an online math homework where she had to answer a bunch of math questions, and it would give her percentage correct at the end, and then re-ask the ones she missed. She was down to one question, and got it wrong, so she got 0% correct. She bust out crying, because she got 0%. And for some reason I thought that was so funny, that I bust out laughing and couldn't stop. And then she got even madder, and cried harder, because I was laughing at her, which made me laugh harder, which made her cry harder. In a technology class a couple years ago, for whatever reason we were having a talk about Kermit the Frog, and my teacher told the class to quiet down and stop Kermit. Someone then said in a completely quiet classroom, in a flawless Kermit voice, "I never die." This is a bad one. We were watching a news report on coronavirus and this lady was talking about her dead mother or grandmother. She was saying adjectives about how she looked when she died. She was this. She was that. And then I hear the legendary line, "She was dead." Obviously. Wasn't that funny? But I started chuckling and my family noticed. I tried to stop but actually couldn't. Had to excuse myself after they continued to make statements which I found hilarious. Funniest and most evil 10 minutes of my year. We were at my uncle's funeral whose death was a surprise. I was standing with my cousin who just came back from abroad to attend her dad's funeral and was breaking down. My aunt, the deceased's sister, came to tell my cousin that someone we know is apologizing for not being able to attend the funeral because she's in the hospital due to a car accident. My aunt went on describing the woman's very difficult condition and how she had an iron pole stuck into her forehead. 10 minutes later, The woman appears through the door in perfect health with just some scratches. My cousin sees her and look at me from the other side of the crowded silent room, and we both can't stop laughing for the rest of the funeral. A friend of mine couldn't stop laughing in church. There was nothing funny, nothing at all, but we couldn't stop. It was so embarrassing. A few years ago I was participating in a religious ceremony with my extended family. I'm not that religious, but my mom and her family are, so I agreed to participate. I was tasked with reading one of the sections aloud and had to read off a list of titles of the Virgin Mary. Most of them were pretty straightforward: Queen of the Angels, Queen Most Holy, etc. But there's one section that starts with the word virgin. I get to it, and I'm trying not to smirk, but as soon as I said the phrase Virgin Most Powerful, I glanced at my brother and and they were grinning at me. Their grins caused me to burst into giggles, and I had to excuse myself while my mom glared knives into me. My brother continued the rest of the reading. This was at a ballet school performance. It was for kids ranging from 5 to 16-year-olds. For one of the younger age groups, they did this thing where one kid pranced from one corner of the stage to the other, and then another kid would do the opposite, in a big X pattern, and they would have these gigantic crap-eating grins on their faces. Just horribly precious. Well, I started losing it at about the 15th kid, but it went on for like 40 children. By the end I was in tears, and all the other adults in the audience near me had found it contagious, so everyone was just sitting there laughing at their own children. I was browsing Reddit and started laughing in class. We were watching a Holocaust documentary. Me and my cousin are to this day best friends, but we were really crazy back when we were 9, 11. In 3rd grade, we both were in this school where the teachers forbid downloading stuff on the computers, and we decided to, I'm not kidding, download some 30th. Let me just explain how the PCs were lined up. It was basically 4 rows of tables with computers on them, meaning that there were many kids beside and behind us. Also, there were 2 teachers going around to check on the kids. We search for 30th, and immediately as the results appear, our 10 over 12-year-old asses start laughing as loud as possible. I thought to myself, yep, this is it. We are gonna get caught. One of the teacher was behind us checking on the other row, and we were laughing so hard that I couldn't move the mouse to close the window, wondering how no one even batted an eye. So I just managed to download a 30 picture and close the window off, then moved the picture in a random folder, and we were never caught. To this day I can't believe the luck our dumb selves had. I was once hired to sing at a funeral, and right before I was called up, the little boy in front of me ripped the loudest fart. I dug my face into my lady friend's shoulder and my whole body trembled as I tried to keep it together. Within seconds I was at the pulpit and trying to come up with what I would do if I broke out laughing. I sang to the best of my ability at the time, with a cough every now and then. We left immediately afterwards and laughed in the car till we couldn't breathe. Children cursing. It's really funny to hear and catches me so off guard. I just start laughing. Hard to discipline them and convince them they shouldn't say those words. When you're laughing your behind off. One of our friend's grandma just passed. We had her over, so she had someone to talk to. Her grandma developed bad schizophrenia and didn't recognize her husband, so our friend's grandpa, nor her daughter and her husband with whom she lived. Our friend went on to describe one particularly dramatic evening when grandma started to throw dishes at grandparsons. Well, she didn't recognize him. He had to dodge all those plates and glasses, which I had to picture and found somewhat amusing. Then our friend mentioned that her poor grandpa is wheelchair bound, and now I had to imagine her grandpa frantically wheeling around to dodge flying dishes. I had to excuse myself to the bathroom, where I completely lost it. I was getting scolded by a teacher and just started to laugh. She wrote a note and told me to get it signed by my parents. Went back home and gave the note to my dad. He started scolding me, and then I started laughing again. I'll spare you the details of what happened after that. At high school graduation during the diplomas, I had no idea one of my classmates' last name was McDonald, and I involuntarily let out a ha when his name was called. Everyone looked at me and I felt like a major bean. My friend's dad was driving us to go camping. He told a story about how he got in a car crash and died on the way to the hospital. only to be brought back. I laughed nervously cause I wasn't sure how to react, and he took it as me laughing at him and got offended. At the time, I couldn't explain why I laughed. That was an awkward car ride. The teacher got so mad at my class that she walked out, and it got awkwardly silent. I just couldn't hold it. After the most horrible terrorist attack in our country's history, I was in class with some people who survived it, and one of these was a really fat girl. She was telling the story about how she survived, and it included a part where she said that she rolled down a hill. And despite the seriousness of the situation, I couldn't stop myself from laughing at the thought of her actually rolling down a hill. Yes, I know I'm going to hell. We were learning history in 6th grade and randomly someone said someone jumped off the bridge yesterday. Now, I laughed because it was out of nowhere, but I did get a talk from the teacher after that. Not the most inappropriate, but when I started my job on L&D, someone was telling another person about a woman whose baby had died. The first person asked, "Oh my god, what happened?" And the second person said it died, and it made me laugh a little, because of course it died. The woman wanted to know how. Second was, a nurse approached me recently and asked me to call someone to fix a bed, because we were moving a patient in it, and it folded, and she got stuck in the bed, and I lost it. I laughed so hard. My girlfriend started laughing at a family dinner about how her dog ate her cat. Turns out it's true, and she can't talk about it without either sobbing or laughing. Most of us thought she was a psycho for a while. Still love her to death though. Edit. Forgot to add. Her dad then took their dog out back and shot it. When my parents told my sister and I they were getting divorced, they obviously hated each other for years, and it was a long time coming. My sister and I looked at each other, and we both just started laughing. Never seen two people so confused in my life. I always laugh when my mom comes to check that I'm sleeping. Accidentally ate some edibles in college. A friend just handed me a cookie, and it took me swallowing it to recognize the taste. I was busy playing on my phone, not paying attention to the conversation our group was having. So I'm sure he wasn't trying to frick with me. Sitting in a class about an hour later, music history for music majors, and I suddenly remembered that we used to throw pencils at the ceiling in high school to get them stuck. I had a mechanical pencil, so I doubted it would work. I looked up and realized that the back 5 or 6 feet of ceiling were actually sheetrock, and I was under it. Well, I reasoned with myself that a mechanical pencil is tougher than a wooden pencil, so if I threw it hard enough, it would probably stick in the sheetrock. If it didn't, then my buddy sitting next to me would laugh, and he'd take the blame for it, which I found hilarious. Then I started thinking about what other people would think if they knew what I was thinking, which was even more hilarious to me. I was holding onto my desk trying to hold the laughter in. Professor noticed, but he kept teaching. I never threw the pencil. I was sitting in class and our teacher was telling us an episode of a guy who was very unfortunate. He suddenly fainted and his bowels just let loose. I couldn't stop laughing and escorted myself out of the classroom. Was working at a sign shop and me and this other guy were drilling holes into some wood paneling when the other guy said, "Hey look," and acted like he was going to drill into the side of his head. The drill bit he was using was one of those flat and wide ones used for boring larger holes, and while it was spinning it grabbed a hold of his hair, ripped out a chunk, and left a perfectly round $half sized bald spot on the side of his head. I had to set down whatever I was doing, since I was laughing so hard, and I kept apologizing to him for doing so. He told me the next day that his girlfriend reacted the same way I did. Sister was letting him rip during a funeral. She was like 8 years old. I was in tears laughing with my brother and 2 similar in age cousins. We all had to get up and leave. When my college professor tripped his voice, we didn't even notice it at first, because everyone was busy listening and taking notes. But when a classmate sitting next to me tried to copy it, I lost it and burst laughing. The teacher thought I was making fun of him and got mad. I couldn't even explain to him, because I was just laughing the whole time. He had to ask me to leave his class, because I just couldn't stop. Edit. Lol guys, sorry. English is not my first language. I don't know what it's called. You know when you're talking, and your voice suddenly sound different mid-sentence. I don't know, but you get the picture. I still laugh when I think about it, lol. I went to a graveside funeral where they played Prop Me Up beside the jukebox and very seriously line danced around his grave. I just buried my face in my hands. I couldn't contain it. One time I did it for a company that had a CEO who hated technology, hated IT, and the entire IT staff for a roughly 400 person office where everyone used computers to do paperwork, was to help desk people and one sysadmin. Since the CEO hated technology, he always went with the cheapest option / fix available at any time. The network was an absolute garbled piece of garbage. Years of him ignoring the solution you're proposing isn't the correct one or scalable and will cause big problems later. Finally caught up around the time I started there. It was the equivalent of starting at a butcher shop where the only tools available were plastic buttock knives. So anyway, apparently the solution to this was to hire a new IT manager. This new pose walks in, and about 1 week in, he starts reading down this list of stuff that needs fixed, and he's starting to become more and more surprised. I can see the look on his face changes. It's sinking in what a freaking mess this entire department was in. It was funny, so I laughed. I wasn't laughing as in, like I don't take this seriously. I was laughing at the impossibleness of our situation, and how absolutely screwed we were, and how fruitless basically any effort would be without more staffing and a hardware budget. Well, this asshole new manager wrote me up, and I got a bad report, because apparently me laughing was me not taking things seriously. It was like if someone told you to clean 200 tractor trailers, and then gave you a toothbrush to do it. You'd laugh in exasperation too, right? When I had to tell my now husband, then boyfriend, his nan had died. I'm terrible at awkward situations. First job out of college, I worked for a global corporation. During the news hire orientation, the our manager was talking about the dangers of the job and how you can die if you are not vigilant of your surroundings, and the crew. She told a gruesome story about an employee dying, and this guy I met and vibed with, who would end up being a coworker in my department, would look at me like the sad / disappointed cricket guy meme. Whenever the our manager mentioned mistakes that led to the death of the employee, she saw and afterwards nearly fired me because she thought I was laughing at her story and not taking it seriously. I was in her crap list for months. After sex I got the giggles for some unknown reason. As a kid I was a nervous laugher. Any kind of stressful situation like being scolded, I couldn't help but laugh nervously. One time I was sitting on the bus, turned to the side with my leg in the aisle talking to somebody, and a lady was walking backwards down the aisle taking roll or something. I didn't even see her coming, and she tripped on my tiny child leg and fell hard because she couldn't catch herself. All I could do was laugh and almost cry. Later I was talked to by the principal, and they were angry as frick because the lady told them I did it on purpose and laughed at her afterwards. All I could do was laugh. I was at my friend's dad's funeral, and in the middle of it, I thought about something, and I started dying. Happens, and I put my hand over my face, but PPL thought I was crying. This crazy Seventh-day Adventist lady I used to know was upset that her kids were getting bullied. Someone had punched her son in the peen, but the way she described it was they punched him in the genital. I had to pretend something was in my eye and go to the bathroom cause I couldn't stop laughing. I'm really not proud of that one. Marine Corps boot camp. After evening showers in the barracks, you line up wearing only a towel for the health and comfort inspection. The barracks, back in those days, at least, was a long open room with bunk beds on each side. So, of course each side lines up facing the center of the room, looking straight ahead as the drill instructors make their way down the line. As they get to you, you are supposed to drop your towel, put your hands above your head, spin around and recite, "Sir, this private has no personal or medical problems at this time." Sir. The problem was, the guy directly across from me was able to flex his pecs individually. He thought it would be funny to do that right when it was my turn to get inspected. So, about 3 seconds before I have to drop my towel, he starts rapidly flexing one then the other. I cracked up and barely got my line out. We both did a lot of push-ups and mountain climbers that night. At a funeral, My family was at the service for my cousin's grandmother. A priest comes up to give a eulogy and he doesn't know anything about the deceased, except some things that someone told him just prior to the funeral. He gets into it, and I swear it was like he was trying to get us to laugh. He said things like, you know, it says that God knows the number of hairs on your head. Personally, I think that's kind of creepy. My dad and I just sort of looked at one another, as if to say, is this real? Then the priest went on with stuff like, it says here she liked to knit. That must mean she was very patient. This guy had next to nothing to go on, but he wasn't exactly making the most of it. My dad and I started chuckling and trying to suppress it. Then the priest said, I remember her at bingo, and we all had our methods of good luck. Some people used frog eyes. Others would bang out the ashes of their pipes on the table. Well, that did it. We couldn't stop. My dad and I were shaking from trying to suppress our laughter so hard. It was really bad. My brother was nudging me because we were starting to get looks, but it was too late. Here this dead grandmother is lying there in a casket and the priest is talking about frog eyes. Maybe from behind I looked like I was crying at least. One time in 4th grade, my teacher was telling the class about World War II. When she mentioned Hitler, one of my classmates asked, wasn't Hitler the guy that put people in ovens? I just bust out laughing, hard and uncontrollably, because the thought of people getting put into ovens alive was just so absurd to me. I knew at the time it wasn't funny at all, but I also wasn't aware of cremation back then. Later on I learned that Holocaust victims were cremated after they were executed and not put into ovens alive. With what I know now, I no longer find it absurd, but I do still recognize the cruelty and inhumanity in it. The death scene in The Boy with the Striped Pajamas. People think I'm crazy, but I laugh when I'm uncomfortable. Friend of my dad's passed away, and the guy was well known for having a pretty good, dark sense of humor. He'd joked about having a get well soon balloon tied around his wrist during his funeral, but no followed through with it. My dad wanted to do it, but my mom, wisely, forbade it. There were a lot of people at this thing, and not all of them would have seen the funny side. As we were walking along to pay our respects, my dad leaned over and said, you know, I don't think he's really gonna be getting well anytime soon. I had to stifle laughter while paying my freaking respects, and it was hard. During Aladdin the live musical, my friend and I had front row seats. The main actor yelled a line. We could both see the spray from his yelling under the bright lights, and that was it. We lost it. This is one I'm probably the least proud of, but sticks out the most. Was at a Safe Drive Stay Alive event with my school, and a guest was talking about how she lost her son to him drink driving. If you didn't know, the event is to show how unsafe driving can impact lives in order to discourage kids aged 16/17 from doing so themselves once they start driving. As this poor woman is talking about her son's death, a picture of him is projected on a screen, and my best friend and I can't help but laugh. We were trying our hardest to not laugh, but we couldn't help it. She used the absolute worst photo of him possible. Think Danzel from Pump It Up, and his gelled hairstyle and tragic soft tan triggered my friend and I. Definitely a terrible time to almost start laughing, considering the woman was discussing the death of her son. Spoilers. We watched Midsommar in theater. I laughed when they jumped off the cliff and we saw a close-up of the head. I also laughed in Hereditary when the phone pole scene happened. My fiancée scolded me, but I told her I think the reason I was laughing is how well Eri subjects your expectations and the way he goes about shocking you. This makes me sound insane, but me and my very abusive aunt were fighting about something stupid on the second floor of the house. So we were arguing. While we walked down the stairs, she started to get more aggressive, gripping my arms and shaking me. And then she started to lightly slap my arms and head, which told she's gonna start pulling my hair soon. I had a morbid thought that time, thinking what would happen if I pushed her down the stairs to see if I could make her bleed like she did to me. My aunt was getting more extreme when she just grabbed me, and out of reflex I pushed her away down the flight of stairs. IDKY, but relief filled me, and I vividly remember I laughed like crazy. My brother and dad had to calm me and call the ambulance. She ended up in the hospital with a major concussion and several stitches, and I got a trip to therapy. I think I was 10 at that time. I had a pediatrician with a stutter. I had known this guy for years, since I was very young. I knew he had a serious stutter. I was like almost too old to go to a pediatrician, like 16 or 17, and something he said just caught me. I started cracking up. My dad was there. Super embarrassing for both of you. I wasn't trying to be mean. I just couldn't stop. Before I was a teacher, I used to be a special education aide, and would support a handful of second grade students in their classroom at different points throughout the day. On MLK Day, the teacher showed a clip of his "I have a dream" speech. But, I have had, love the Onion, and my mind tends to wander. So my brain drifted to their version. I had really weird dream last night, and a little giggle escaped. It was bad. Me, now, reading these, in the middle of the night, laughing my ass off, and trying not to wake anyone. My coach was scolding our team after a really bad loss to our rival school, and I started laughing for no reason. I tried to pretend I was crying. When my colleague told me she accidentally ran over her own cat. When Joker came out, I went to see it on the first day, when everyone was a little on edge about the threat of violence in cinemas. Without spoiling too much of the movie, there's a scene where he says, "How about another joke? What do you get when you cross mentally ill owner with a society that abandons him and treats him like trash? You get what you frickin' deserve." And, being that he's the Joker, does something quite violent. When he said the joke and the punchline, there were audible gasps of shock, where I laughed really loudly in a packed theater. Not because I'm a sadist, but it was a great freaking joke, especially given its context in the film. The theater immediately had that vacuum of silence, and my friend moved her seats away from me. One day when I was 12, I was playing at a friend's house when my mom called and asked for me. Landline. I'm old. I got on the phone and my mom told me I had to come home right away because my grandfather passed away. I hung up and started giggling. I was shocked by the news, and my young brain just didn't know how to react, I guess. So my friend was standing there watching this all go down, and asked what was so funny. I told him I had to leave, and he asked why. I told him, because my grandfather died, and left immediately. He was really mad at me for a while. Even after he found out my grandfather actually did die. He didn't believe my excuse for leaving so abruptly that day, and he thought I was lying to him about something. It was one of the strangest reactions I've ever had to something. We were doing acid with a couple friends. One of us was having a bad trip, looked a bit distressed, and generally wasn't enjoying it. I, on the other hand, would bust out laughing like a maniac every time he opened his mouth. He would say a single word and I would start laughing my ass off in an instant and couldn't stop it. Felt like the biggest asshole ever. When my teen GF's mum announced to the family she was still a virgin. I was a teenager, I think 15 at the time. My mom and her abusive, now ex-boyfriend, took me to the National Museum of the Marine Corps. One of the displays in the main room showed a rifle stood up between two boots. Being a dumb child, and not knowing what the actual meaning of this was, I thought it looked kind of silly, and started laughing at it. That's one of the moments that comes to me as I'm trying to sleep at night. When my grandma died, it was on the 1st of April, so when my mom told me, I laughed so hard and thought she was making a sick joke. One of my high school English teachers brought up the fact that some ships back in the day would have cabin boys, or as they are sometimes referred to as peg boys. While I'm truly saddened by the concept and the reality of what a cabin boy was, I couldn't help but chuckle at the term peg boy. It just caught me by surprise. I felt bad, but I couldn't help it. Sorry, Mrs. H. I swear I wasn't laughing at human tragedy.